These elements determine the validity of a contract. So let's look at each of them.
We'll start with the obvious: offer and acceptance. For a contract to exist, one party must unconditionally accept the other party's offer, but typically this goes back and forth between the parties with changes or counter-offers being made. This can get confusing, and acceptance can be communicated explicitly or implied. So subject to contract is often used to avoid any doubt before full agreement is reached.
Now we can move on to consideration. Consideration is the promise of the person receiving the offer doing something for the person who made the offer. Consideration requires that something of legal value is exchanged for the goods or services being supplied. It doesn't have to be fair. Contract law doesn't protect anyone from making a bad deal.
Then there's intent to create legal relations. A contract doesn't exist simply because there is a relationship between the parties. Intention can be implied by the fact that it's not expressly denied. Sounds confusing? Well, this means it can be inferred by the circumstances, and silence is not necessarily a way out. So, if you're accepting goods or services but haven't signed a contract, it doesn't mean you don't have an agreement in place, just because it's not explicitly in writing.
You also need certainty. A contract is legally binding only if its terms are sufficiently defined to enable a court of law to understand the parties' obligations. So, if you're using uncommon terms, define these at the start of the contract to make it clear and comprehensible.
Legal capacity means the authority or power under law that a party has to enter into a contract. Generally, this refers to having competence to perform the contract and being of sound mind to have reasonably agreed to it. For representatives acting on behalf of companies, their capacity may be explicit or implied. Again, just claiming the person who signed the contract did not have the capacity to do so is not necessarily a way out.
Legality is straightforward. A court of law will not uphold a contract for activities deemed illegal in the jurisdiction it's covered by. And then there is free consent. All parties involved must willingly enter into the contract. This can be implied, but it cannot be obtained through coercion, fraud, or undue influence. For example, you can't say to a supplier that they will never be considered for other business with your company unless they agree to all the terms and conditions in the contract currently on offer.
For a contract to be successful, it needs to clearly describe scope of work, roles and responsibilities, and key performance indicators. And it needs to be understood by all parties. Upfront planning and early engagement with legal is crucial. If you're not talking about the contract during its term, that means its requirements were clearly understood. It's usually only referenced when something goes wrong, and when that happens, you want it to have been well written.